So, Julius, day one in Kharkiv, we arrived after a pretty civilized overnight train from Odesa. And look at the conditions, beautiful weather, people out in the streets. It's International Ladies' Day, a lot of people with flowers. It's got a kind of not quite a festive atmosphere, but it's pretty encouraging, isn't it?
I think you might get picked up on that. I think it's International Women's Day, and my millennial friends will correct you, but it certainly is. And, you know, compared to 2 nights ago, we were in Odessa and the generators were going and it was dark and it was a bit depressing and a bit sad. And, you know, suddenly we've got sunlight, lots and lots of people out. And the other thing, of course, we've said this before, but it is quite amazing, you know, in this war-torn country, or parts of the country are certainly war-torn, that you can have this sort of almost luxury overnight sleeper from one end of the country to the other, which is what we just had in great luxury.
Ukrainian Railways famous for their sort of stoicism, their determination to keep going. There have been a couple of attacks on trains, actually, in the last few months, which is pretty unusual because the Russians don't tend to target them, but they've been hit by a couple of drones. So even that way isn't entirely safe. But we're looking around the city. It seems benign, but we can see directly ahead of us, can't we, Julius, the sign of a bombed-out building, all the glass has been blown out. We heard an hour ago explosions. We don't quite know how close they were to the city, certainly not that close to our hotel, but still, let's not forget, this is a city under attack.
No, absolutely. And this place was really pounded at the beginning of 2022. And of course, all the international attention was in Kiev, so it didn't really get its due in terms of coverage. But it was hit much harder than Kiev. And since then, things have definitely calmed down in terms of sort of danger levels for residents. But, you know, only 2 days ago, there was this attack on a tower block in the north of the city that killed somewhere between 5 and 10 people, we think, possibly up to 10. And we'll be going there later to have a look. But walking around here, you'd think it was just a normal city.
But there have been reports of a first-person view drone, fiber optic, getting as far as the outer ring road of the city. So, I mean, the danger is coming closer from all different angles, and yet the streets are full of people who are just living their lives.
Yeah, and we should mention that, you know, there are cities like Kherson in the south that have pretty much been, you know, most of the residents have been pushed out by the Russians doing this thing that they call the human safari, which is they just try and kill as many civilians as they can until life becomes untenable. And they've tried the same with Kharkiv, but just thankfully they haven't succeeded in any meaningful way yet.
Volodymyr, it's very good to see you. It's been just over a year since we were last in Kharkiv. Quite a lot has changed, which we're going to come on to in a minute. What's your kind of general feeling? You're off duty today, but you're never really off duty, are you?
Yeah, not really off duty, just not in my uniform. Well, the feelings are quite bright, just like the weather outside. I mean, we finally got through winter, which has been hard. Not so hard on Kharkiv, but quite hard on Kyiv and other cities that have really suffered.
Yeah, why less on Kharkiv, actually? I think people will be surprised to hear that.
I think that Russia was still quite smart in targeting like what they call the centers of decision-making. Because, I mean, Kharkiv, you would expect, like you say, that life would be hard in Kharkiv. However, targeting Kyiv, which is also a larger city and has more centralized heating and water, so that gives just more yield for hits. So Kharkiv has been quite good in distributing, decentralizing its power. I mean, there have been some outages, but still not as bad. So I think that that is overall like a positive feeling. There have been some progress and some developments on the front line. There have been developments in the organizational structure of the army, like the system of the corps has been introduced, and basically a corps is a larger permanent operational tactical level unit which can comprise a couple dozen thousand people. And again, that means that now you have permanent staffs, headquarters that are overseeing larger front areas and are able to conduct larger operations. And there have been changes in the higher political and military leadership, which I think are also we are very optimistic about. So I think that our new Minister of Defense is possibly like the best choice that Ukraine could have right now. He's young, he's very smart, he's
about your age, isn't he?
He's younger. He's much younger. I think he's 30 plus ish.
Yeah. Has he actually been to visit you? Because we've heard that he's been to visit most of the frontline brigades.
He hasn't visited us this time, but we have been in contact with his team multiple times. So even from his first months in office, we're seeing that there are some positive changes, and he's been known for his ability and to change large, complex systems, very bureaucratic systems. And he's not a new guy to the army. Although he's not a military guy himself, but in his previous jobs, he was the one who actually set up first companies of UAVs, who created the army of drones, who created this electronic point system, basically sort of gamifying and putting a number on specific hits. So I think his team are good.
Can I just pick up on one thing you said there? It's interesting. So the power and the heat system is more centralized in Kiev, and less centralized in Kharkiv. Is that the way the city is designed, or is that a war adaptation?
I wouldn't know.
Right.
I haven't really researched that, but yeah, we saw that when Russia repeatedly hit a couple of power stations on the left bank of Kiev, it basically left without either heating or water, like a large part of the suburbs. So yeah, that's
on this point, I mean, the way we see it, I think, Saul, you'd agree with me here, is there's kind of three lines of attack for Russia. One is the front line. One is probably the sort of international politics, narrative, propaganda, and the third one is this attempt to demoralize the civilian population,
right,
to make them cold and fed up and demand change and that sort of thing. Do you think that the third, we've seen a lot of that third line this winter, do you think that has succeeded in any way?
I don't think that it has succeeded. However, they're definitely very good at cognitive warfare, also in Ukraine. And I think that the rise of artificial intelligence and the system of bots and how easy it is to create content right now has become a problem. And we see how the bot comments are populating any of the news. And definitely I think that's a large issue that I don't think that either any of the social media platforms has answer to, because it creates sort of a deformed system what's happening out in the world. You read some bad news, and then you read thousands of negative comments, and then you're thinking, okay, so looks like we've lost faith. But then you click on 10 first of those comments, and then it's locked profiles. So Russia has been very good at finding those small openings and trying to divide a population whenever they
inside Ukraine and as well as outside
Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. And I have visited my family in Lithuania, and I met some friends who are on the board for the largest public TV channel. And there have been some tensions inside Lithuania about the role and development of this public channel. And then she said she was surprised to see how much attention of the Russian bots were just to that. So basically they're looking for any division points in the societies, whichever they want. So they want, race, religion, language, politics, etc., and then they're hitting there. And I am really surprised and impressed by the amount of resources that they're able to pour into those multiple, hundreds of lines of efforts.
They've had good practice, haven't they? I mean, we've been talking about their hybrid warfare capabilities for the last 15 or 20 years. Moving back to Khartiia's responsibility for the front line, it's much bigger now, of course, Volodymyr. You've explained you're now a corps, not just a brigade. You're defending, I think, 40 kilometers of front. Is that correct?
Could be slightly bigger. Plus, we have a task force fighting in Kupiansk about, you heard about that. We talked about that previously. But yeah, that's a larger area.
And can you tell us the latest situation in Kupiansk? Because this is part of a narrative which, of course, is very important for Ukraine, which is that we're not just losing ground. It seemed for maybe 15 months or so that it was just a gradual incremental nibbling away at Ukrainian territory. Although interestingly, when you put that into context, I was reading an account that said that since the recovery of territory in 2022, that was obviously by Ukraine, Russia has only actually captured 1.5% of Ukrainian territory for over 1 million casualties.
Right.
So this is a glacial progress. Some people have compared it to worse than the progress in the First World War, which is, world beating, basically. They really haven't been very successful at their frontline fighting. So going back to the Kupiansk situation, what is happening there now? Because we haven't heard yet that the city has been entirely cleared.
Unlike Russians, we are very careful about operations planning, and we really don't want just to have this media announcement, okay, we have cleared the city just for the sake of that, if that means losing a couple hundred more of our guys. Urban operations and clearing cities are very complicated, so it's unlike those CQB movies that you see where teams swiftly move through the rooms and just clear room by room. Most of the times we're talking about large multi-story buildings, apartment blocks that are in ruins that provide multiple cover. And in most of the areas, it's much easier to move in, locate the enemy, and then our guys pull out and then leave it to the drones to clear. And it's harder to hit anything with a drone in an apartment block. So that's going to take some time. Plus, even though we've cut logistics, but in a city you're still able to find supplies like in basements, apartments, etc. So it's going to take some time.
What's your best estimate of how many Russian soldiers are in the city? A couple of dozen.
Only a couple dozen. But again, we're talking about a couple dozen fighters. And they have, literally no logistics. All of the logistics that they get is through quadcopter drones. So they get now and then some ammo and batteries for the radios, and that's it. So it's going to be some long process, but just clearing them building by building. But like I said, we're fine as long as, because we're not fighting for the territory per se. So our commanders, I think, are thinking in terms of larger effects. And so the effect retaking the city has been to disable Russians from moving further south and then cutting our grouping of forces to the other bank of Oskil River. And so if they cannot do that, and if we can secure the city, we could wait.
Can I just ask, because I'm fascinated by the operation in Kupiansk, it seems to me, and I'm really asking for your thoughts on this, but it seems to me that it's almost a new way of fighting for the Ukrainian army, that instead of launching a big counteroffensive that will take lots of casualties and happen very quickly, that you you moved very, very slowly, you tried to minimize casualties, you kind of chipped away at their lines, And, you know, this whole thing happened over a period of weeks, if not a couple of months. Is that an accurate kind of picture?
Well, yes and no. So the movement was quite fast. So the tempo of the operation was quite fast, but there was also a lot of operational security measures around it. So none of that information was public, was out. The Russians didn't know that we are in the forest. They thought that it was our drones killing their teams, not actually like assault teams moving in. So it took them a long time, and I think actually Zelensky's video was like the awakening call for them, but it was already too late because our guys have already like cleared a lot of that. So
this was last November-ish?
A little bit earlier, I think, wasn't it?
So it started over in November, but I think that the announcement happened in
I think
It's latest December.
mid-December.
Mid-December.
Zelensky visit was sometime
mid-December, but we started in October. So it was slow in like the doctrinal terms that yes, it was like in meters or 100 meters, but there was a lot of very meticulous planning that went into it, and so for us it is basically a culmination of what we call the Khartiia method. That is very, very careful mission planning. So we use the military decision-making process, which is basically the U.S. analog for combat estimate process that's used in the British Army, where every mission is very carefully analyzed, and you look at the terrain, and you look at the weather, and then you look at your own forces and the enemy, and then you develop multiple courses of actions, and then you war game them. And then after you develop this plan, you go into the preparation part. And so your specific teams know their missions and they train and practice. So if we're talking about capturing a village, you build or you lay out like a scheme of this village, and then your teams practice capturing through it.
And I'm sure one of the aims here was to increase the casualty rate among the Russians compared to your own. What is your estimate of the ratio of casualties between Russian and Ukrainian for that particular operation?
I think it was like, from what I could say, like 1 to 20. And if we're talking about an assault operation, that's unheard of and unseen. But again, because that's, I think we're looking or developing for a new way how we can regain maneuver without, in this very transparent battlefield and very, very lethal battlefield. That's why there was no armor used there, because armor is loud, it's seen, it's easy to hit, and with fiber optic drones, you cannot protect it with electronic warfare systems. So it's very vulnerable.
Not even, Volodymyr, to move the guys into position with APCs. You remember when we were here last year and I was looking at you were showing us some of your operational planning. I mean, it included getting the guys to insert with APCs.
That was pre-FPV, pre-fiber optic.
Okay. Okay. Pre-fiber optic. So it's all changed. You're not going to use APCs now.
Well, at least not under current conditions. Russians are still using them now and then, but they're using them as taxis, so it's a one-way trip. Also, I think that the role of unmanned ground vehicles has increased. We were talking about this kill zone, and that means, but we still need to supply all of those infantry positions and artillery and FPV positions. And so we're primarily doing that through unmanned ground vehicles. We might tomorrow possibly go to the workshop of one. I don't think that we went last year.
No,
we
didn't.
So I think it would be worth looking at some of the that stuff. So, but basically that turned into a full logistics supply system where you've got your FedEx. So your teams, battalions, they supply their needs daily. And then there is a special logistics team that plans the routes, and then the engineers prepare the unmanned ground vehicles, and then battalions come pick up those charged ground vehicles, load them with stuff, and then they deliver them like the closest they can get without getting hit on a pickup truck.
May I also ask if you're using ground drones for offensive combat operations, for example, inside Kupiansk?
Yeah.
Are you using them?
Both like strike drones with grenade launchers installed on them, kamikaze drones, basically where you have a smaller drone that can carry, I don't know, a couple dozen kilos of explosives, so it can drive into a building.
It's like the Mammoth in the Second World War, where the Germans had the radio-controlled Mammoth, but it was on a wire, basically.
No.
Is it all, and these ground drones, are they all remote controlled, or is some of it AI controlled?
No, they are all remotely controlled. Some through internet connection, digital connection, some through radio connection, but they're all human controlled. We're working on like different ways of automating or creating this cruise control, but that still requires human attention. And same with aerial systems. I don't think that in the nearest future they're gonna be like fully automated systems. First, Geneva Convention would not like that. So you really need human oversight for the final mile. You might have some solutions, and there are some solutions that are basically talking about this last mile hit. Basically, when you detect a target, and then you choose it, and then you give the drone a go for attacking that specific target, and then when it starts dropping down, you might lose connection with it just because of the radio horizon, but you're still making that final decision.
And one more thing on the internet and comms. We've heard a lot about the effects of the whole Starlink issue, that Starlink was withdrawn from the Russian forces, basically. In your sector, has that had a significant effect, or is that more in other sectors of the front line?
Well, we have seen some effect. We have heard reports that their comms were off, but they're quite good at... So, I mean, they were fighting quite effectively before they started using Starlinks, so they were able to adjust through Wi-Fi bridges, through, again, fiber optics, through radio.
So do you think big picture, on the, not just this sector, but big picture on the Ukrainian front line, that advantage has now kind of been lost somewhat, that little surge of advantage?
Well, I heard about some progress in other areas, so that possibly happens, and I think that also the major effect that Starlink, the locking out Starlinks has had, was not on the front line per se, but rather on their ability to send in Shaheds deep into into Ukrainian area, into the air, into the civilian area, and have full control of that, online. So I think that was the major and the larger effect.
Is it true that Russians are using Wi-Fi towers on the very front line to communicate with each other, putting Wi-Fi's on top of each other on a huge rod?
Yeah,
and that's how they managed to replace Starlink?
That's the system has been on for a couple of years. I mean, we've been using it, Russians have been using it. So those Wi-Fi bridges, that's what we're talking about, basically. So you're pulling in your fiber optic as close as possible, and then you have the Wi-Fi repeater set up. And as long as you have clear line of sight, it could be wireless but broadband connection 10, 20 kilometers out, as long as you have a receiver on the other end.
Volodymyr, just going back to the arithmetic of war, it's a sort of a grim way to express it, but basically if your advantage over the Russians in casualties in Kupiansk was 20-1, this is something that the Russians are not going to be able to sustain if that's right across the front. And
I would say that was for one specific operation. We would not have that ratio Here in Kharkiv area,
Yeah.
we're more on the defensive side.
Okay.
So they're just not throwing so many people at us.
Okay, but can you still give an estimate? The reason I mention this is because Zelensky himself has said recently the Russians are running out of troops. They are losing more than they can actually replace. And one of the reasons that's happening is because the Ukrainian army has got so good at not losing its own people and yet at the same time degrading the Russian capability.
So to sustain this ratio, we need several things. Some of those depend on us, like that's the mission planning and training of the troops. Some of that depends on basically procurement and equipment. So you need a lot of drones. So those some of the new type of forces that are being created in Ukraine, like the Code 9.2, the 475 regiment, the drone assault regiment. So they've been fighting with us in Kupiansk, and they have been very effective. Basically, that's your assault infantry that's heavily supported by drones that replace the artillery preparation of the battlefield through heavy drone attacks, and very accurate, but you need a lot of drones for that.
And so big picture, going back to what we were just talking about before we started recording, do you think that things have got slightly better for Ukraine in the last 2 or 3 months in terms of the battleground picture?
I think that, again, I read the news just like everyone else, and I have only information about our area. But from what I hear, yes, there have been some progress, and I think it shows that there are capable corps, multiple corps with some good prominent commanders that are able to do that. So if we just are able to keep up primarily this the training of the leadership, commanders, etc., because then, I think we could have some brighter future.
And do you think, as you say, you read the news, do you think about things like Hungary's fight with Ukraine, the Middle Eastern effect on the war, the Russian economic effect on the war, or are you just this is my job, I'm going to concentrate on this and do my best here?
Well, we have the culture of stoicism in our unit, where it's important to distinguish between things that you worry about and things that you can impact, and better worry about things that you can have impact on. So obviously, we read the news. Obviously, we talk about it, but we try still to focus on stuff that we can change.
Sounds very sensible.
I'm fortunate I'm not on the strategic level, so I don't have to make decisions.
But you have insights that we don't have, so it's always interesting, yeah. I just one more question. So talking about your sector, assuming that you continue to get the financial support, the ammunition, the soldiers that you need, can you continue to fight in this way for a long period of time, or as long as is necessary?
I don't think that we have a choice. So, yeah, I would think so, and I think that at some point we'll be able to, because currently the units of our corps have been distributed throughout the front line. So there are some other units that are fighting in other areas, not under our operational command. And I think that as the reform of the course progresses and we are able to pull more of our organic units under our command, that would mean just even more impact.
I just want to ask the most important question of the day. Today is International Women's Day, and I know there are a lot of very brave female warriors in ZSU and also in Khartiia Brigade. How did you celebrate it?
Indeed, well, last year we made a very successful recruitment campaign for women, specifically into combat positions related to EW systems, unmanned ground vehicles, UAV operators, etc. So there are quite a few very capable, very effective female fighters in our unit, and we've had some discussions yesterday about like how do we address this day. And the new progressive wing has won, and rather than just buying them flowers and spa certificates, so the women today are celebrating this day on the shooting range. Basically,
So you bought them a day on the shooting range?
yes.
Fantastic. Sorry, I've always got one question, but I promise this is the last one. We hear two different things, or two different narratives about the Russian forces. One is that they have learned a lot through the course of this war, and they may have started off being extremely incompetent and making a lot of mistakes, but they've got better and better and better. But we also hear that the quality of the Russian troops is they're getting older, they're getting worse, the men are not as in good condition. What is the experience that you have from your sector of the front line? How would you talk about this or think about this?
Well, both statements are true. So first, on the operational and strategic level, they're learning, and they're learning fast, and they're able to do the proper lessons learned programs, and then accumulate that and scale those decisions, like on a larger industrial national level. And their generals are not dying as often as their infantry guys. So yes, while the quality of the I think that we have pretty much chewed upon all of their professional army, and so their army, just like ours, is fully civilian, like ex-civilian right now. So the quality of those recruits, over your regular infantry grunt, is very low. But they're really good on operational level, and they have some very good and effective UAV teams. So the Rubicon Center, which has grown into a good and capable force, something that we need to reckon with.
The Rubicon and the anti-drone, counter-drone teams?
Yeah. So their infantry guys are bad, but they have a lot of them. Basically, there is a concept in like a battle drill, move to contact, where you basically move until when you need to identify the enemy positions until you get fired upon, and then you retreat. So basically they're using their people for that, but they don't retreat, they just die there. But at least they know that, okay, we've got a Ukrainian position there, and then they try to bypass. We would use drones for that, so they're using just people for this drill.
Thank you.
So, Julius, we've just had a chat with Volodymyr Dehtyarov, the spokesman of the Khartiia Brigade, and he was kind of adding on some of the stuff we heard last year, and also our interview with him a couple of months ago when we spoke about the Khartiia's involvement in the Kupiansk operation, one of the few successful counter attacks that the Ukrainians have had over the last year or so, although they do seem to be ramping up one or two more now. I mean, one of the things that struck me about what he said is how effective Khartiia have become at operating this new form of warfare, which is that we are going to use technology and planning and just a more professional approach to fighting the Russians, to use every little incremental gain we've got to reduce our casualties and recruit and increase the number of Russian casualties. Now, mostly they're operating in this sort of 40-kilometer defensive position in and around Kharkiv, but they're also prepared to send task forces, as they did to Kupiansk, to add their expertise to offensive operations. So things are really beginning to change on the battlefield. What I was interested in is the numbers game. they lost 1 to every 20 the Russians lost in Kupiansk. He said it's not quite the same in their general fighting, but those are the sort of numbers we're beginning to hear elsewhere. So that is just one tiny indication that things are beginning to turn quite heavily against the Russians on the battlefield. What did he say that you found interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't here last week when you talked to him, so for me this interview was fascinating. The first time I'd met him, and there were quite a lot of things he picked up on. You might be being a little bit more optimistic than he was, because the idea that the battle is turning, I think it's too early to say that. But there is this sense that providing they get the kit, they get the ammo, they get the money, they can keep fighting for as long as, maybe not forever, but for as long as is necessary. But some of the things that I picked up on, one is something I sort of heard before, but he's just reinforcing it. This idea that this 40-kilometer kill zone, and then very small pockets of soldiers within the kill zone, and then, as you say, meticulously planned operations to take advantage of various openings. He said something very interesting about the Russian military. He said, the level of men, the quality of the men fighting is steadily getting worse and worse and worse, because, of course, Russian recruitment is now kind of getting at the dregs a little bit. It's a bit rude to say that, but effectively what's going on. But he also said the Russian army is getting better and better and better. Yeah. And he said they're very good at their lessons learned, and they're quite good at a sort of higher operational level, which they really weren't at the beginning of the war. And this goes against, some of the sort of common perception in the West that the Russians are just awful. They're not awful. They have their strengths and weaknesses just like the Ukrainian army do. So that was another thing that was of interest to me. One thing I was particularly fascinated by, and I have been for quite a while now, is that I run a wilderness lodge in Canada, and that's my sort of main thing. I take people who want to see grizzly bears. It's called Wild Bear Lodge. And in 2021, we did a program for British and Canadian injured veterans to try and help them sort of regain some of their purpose in life. In 2024, we did another program for Ukrainians, and we took some of the veterans from the first program into the second program. And I've always had this sort of inkling that taking people who have been hurt and injured and traumatized in war and giving them a role to the extent that they can manage is good for them, not bad for them. And what sort of chimed with me is he said, yes, we take a lot of injured veterans back into the army. Maybe they're not assault troops anymore. Some of them are amputees, but they can go into admin roles. They can do all kinds of support roles. And not only is it good for the army, but it's usually good for the individuals concerned. You're not just cutting them off from the mothership and saying, you're on your own now. You're bringing them back in the capacity that you can. So the sense you get overall with the Ukrainian army is that they're obviously short of men. They're obviously a bit desperate in numbers terms. So they're having to be extremely inventive and clever in the way that they use their military. And in some ways, that puts them on the cutting edge.
Yeah, and I think, as I've been saying a long time on the podcast, there is an awful lot that NATO, Western countries generally, can learn from the Ukrainian army. They're actually doing it in real time, real life situations, and we're just planning and assuming. And we've learned one or two lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan, which is not going to be terribly useful in a peer-on-peer adversary type war. So an awful lot of exchange. I know it's already begun, military exchange between the Ukrainians and NATO is going to benefit both sides, basically. And I think slowly but surely it will draw. It may be difficult to get the membership of NATO anytime soon, but the closer security connections or the closer military connections there are with Ukraine, the better, I think, the long-term security of the country.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is worth mentioning that, we think Khartiia, which is in this Kharkiv area, is one of the, elite, it's one of the best units in Ukraine. So what we're seeing, this sort of level of ability to communicate, ability to think and plan, and operational accuracy is not necessarily happening all the way along the front line. And, we did ask him some general questions about how is the big picture, and he tended to zero back into the precise situation he knew about. And, and Kupiansk has possibly been the most successful operation that the Ukrainians have launched in the last year. Yeah. So we have to be careful not to think that the same is applying in the Donbass or down towards Zaporizhia.